This video is about an upcoming new dungeon type, which is the Gremlin fortresses. Up until this point, I've been reusing castles for pretty much all the dungeons, and the idea is just the different factions infested the castles, took them over, and then that allowed the same dungeon to be reused over and over. But each of the factions should also have their own dungeon type. So here we're looking at a first rough outline. Well, not rough, actually looking very good, of the Gremlin Fortress. These guys are going to have their own dungeons. Here we can see their crude kitchen. They're roasting a spit. They keep these like disgusting meat piles here. The idea here is just overgrown, kind of like goblins. Things are breaking down, decaying, and then it starts playful, and then it's increasingly dark the deeper you go. But first, I want to talk briefly about symbolism, and we'll get into the process, and I'll show you what's been going on behind the scenes of some of the documents I have here. But first, I want to briefly talk about symbolism, and why do I want to talk about symbolism? If you are a logically minded person, when you hear talk of symbolism, it's probably a bit of a turnoff. It's like, why are you talking about symbols? It's so fuzzy. It's not concrete. Especially designing a game. Don't you just want to make the game fun? Can't you model fun? Just do testing. What is the point of having a symbol? But I do think there is a place for symbolism, even to that kind of person. And the fact is that reality comes to us as symbols, as objects. We all have dreams. Even if you don't find symbols particularly meaningful to you, you're still having symbols appear to you in your dreams. You're still seeing reality symbolically. And I think there's a danger without getting a thematic or symbolic clarity at the outset of just starting throwing in game mechanics, especially with game design. Similar with story writing. I think you can get, if you forget the theme, if you can get the idea, the meaning, you start just creating plot for the sake of it, to create exciting plot. There's nothing to ground it. And for me, it starts with a feeling or an idea or a symbol. And I've made this Venn diagram here to discuss gnome symbolism. So here's, in my experience and from the little I know of gnome mythology, it falls into different camps. So we have this idea of a creature or an entity digging in the earth, renewal, something linked with nature. When we wake up in the morning, and there's like dew on the grass, and it's like plants are sprouting. There's a sense of nature has renewed itself. There's been something going on in the night, something moving around, something under the soil. And that, if we were to give that like the closest creature that represents that, we might say dwarves. They're always mining. They're finding something new. Dwarves could mean a lot more than that, but that's like a close fit. But also in gnome symbolism, we see this playfulness, trickery side. And if we were to find a creature that's closest to representing that, we might say a fairy. But there's also this evil demonic part. If we were to mix these, evil, demonic, and playfulness, you would get something like goblins, I guess. They're like an overlap of these elements. And if you were to mix earth, digging, renewal with evil, demonic, what would you get? I don't know. That's also... we might even put goblins in the middle. And then dwarfs would kind of... gnomes. Gnomes would kind of be in the middle. Would be about here, where they've got the earth digging and the trickery, but less the evil, demonic side. And this is the general idea of the different meanings we find in these types of creatures. Dwarves, gnomes, goblins, fairy. For me, I would put gremlins here as definitely playful, tricky, but they also have some of this earth digging, but they also have some of the evil, demonic. So they're kind of like a take on goblins. And how I wanted it is the earlier gremlins are more in this playful trickery side, and then it gets a little more of this evil feeling when you dig deeper. So I put them like somewhere close to here. And that's the guiding principle or like a theme when thinking about these gremlins. And it also relates to the story I want to tell with them. where we see here on the roadmap, there's going to be 3 major factions in the game: Gremlins, Bandits, Cultists. Each of them has a thematic element that will have a quest line, and a side quest will relate to. Hopefully not too on the nose, but just like a feeling or a meaning to create something consistent as the player plays. When it comes to Gremlins, on this Venn diagram of gnome symbolism, the starting place here is their playful trickery, but they're in the ground, they're finding treasure, they want treasure, and then there's a bit of this evil side. So that's sort of how they place on this. If you're interested in gnome symbolism, there's a great video by Jonathan Pageau. I'll put that in the description, where he talks about the symbolism of gnomes. That was a great starting place for me, and it got me excited about symbolism too, watching his videos, so I highly recommend that. The next step was to write this out as a short paragraph describing the scene. If you read movie scripts, they'll often have, like when a scene is set, like a short little paragraph just to give the feeling as clearly as they can. And that's what this attempt here is. And also I find a picture online that I think is close to what I'm looking for. And then, without just describing symbols exactly, we have something a little further along, something more concrete. And this is actually from the document I sent to the musician, because music typically starts a lot earlier in the process. Just describing the place and the feeling and the vibe, and as a starting point. And if I turn this whole process into steps, we could say this is kind of how I've been going about things. Part 1, we clarify symbols theme, resulting in some kind of description or picture. Then we want to, once we have that, next, which I'll show in a bit, is a brainstorming session. Then, from that, pick favorite ideas, create list of assets. An artist needs a list of assets, so an idea is not enough. You have to turn it into what exactly is needed. And then eventually first pass, where it's implemented. Now, whenever you implement anything, a million questions come up and you get a ton of new ideas. So that's why I say first pass. Then, usually there's a second list of assets, some last minute rushing, and then a second pass, and then you have player testing. So next up, I'll show the brainstorming session. Forgive me here, a bit of a cold today, so I hope the voice isn't too off-putting. If it is, you can skip this one, but I wanted to make a video anyways. Yeah, let's look at the brainstorming document. Here we have the result of the brainstorming session. Now, how this worked is I basically booked a 1-hour session with 2 of my friends, had them come over, and for 1 hour we just spat out ideas, and I recorded them. I opened the meeting with the goals, talking about the theme, the symbols, and then we just discuss what might work. They're both have played the game extensively, and yeah, I find it immensely helpful, especially during brainstorming sessions, to have help. I've done a lot of the programming for this game, and I put my name on it. I have definitely am not responsible for all of the design. I've had a lot of good people help me, and I go to certain people depending on what the feature I'm working on is, because different people, if you can learn like what they're really good at, it's extremely valuable. So if I'll scroll through this, not all of this will make perfect sense, because some of these notes are very shorthand. If you read this, some of them will seem like I didn't fully explain them, but lots of good ideas. So, like, we were talking a while about how can we get the gremlins fighting each other, like in Lord of the Rings, they go to the orcs, and the orcs are like hungry for meat, and they are they're rabbling with each other and fighting, and there's the big ones that push other ones out of the way. We discussed a lot. How can we make that work as a mechanic? One really good suggestion was the shamans could have an AoE confuse and then hit their own gremlins, just to cause chaos. Like it should be rowdy, dirty. All kinds of fighting happen, not just the player, not just like this static cold world waiting for the player. The movie Ants. If you're around my age, you probably saw it. Where in the ant colony, it's like all the ants are marching, moving around, like all this bugs, this feeling of activity. And yeah, so then we moved on to like room ideas, what the different furniture might look like, what some of the new creatures might be. Gremlin Bugler, this guy's hilarious. He follows the player and plays a little trumpet, and we'll call in for help. And during this time, you're not going too much into mechanics because that's a slows things to a halt. It's about free, easygoing creativity. Creativity has a lightness to it. It has a playfulness. If you're too much thinking about mechanics at this point, it defeats the purpose. So that was this attempt, and I wrote up a lot of these ideas. Some gremlin potions. These are going to be hilarious. And then now it's in a document, which is great because I can show other people, get more feedback, more notes, more comments on the document. And we have a first early pass of some content for this dungeon. The next step was turning that into a list of assets for the artist. So this is a document I sent to our artist where it's a bit of an intro here and just turn it into a list of furniture because it's not his job to come up with what all the stuff should be. And he has lots of good ideas, but if he doesn't know where we're going in terms of game mechanics or thematically, it can be too much to just put onto a concept artist the necessity that they basically they have to come up with content. It's much better they could focus on the art. But I do also like to describe the rooms that we're looking for because he will have good ideas. If I say there's going to be an alchemist room, well, we might have an asset request. We want a cauldron, some shelves, plants growing, mushrooms, but he might get some more ideas for things that go in that room as well. And the clarity, every time you add clarity, it makes room for other people's clarity. The more you can be decisive and decide what you want and lay it out, the more people can add to it. And leading a project, I think, is a lot about that sort of vision. Is enough. You're clarifying the vision enough, but in a way that makes space for everyone. Not in a way that locks it down, but in a way that's like, oh, this is the kind of place we're making. And then everybody adds, and it adds more, and it just gets better and better and better. Here you can see some spoilers for some of the new creatures. Here I have a reference image for the loot pile. That was a big question, we have lots of loot in Doors of Trithia, so it was like a design challenge. How do the gremlins don't have like wooden pirate chests everywhere? Where do they store their loot? And one idea that came out of the brainstorming is loot piles. Just have them leave it on the ground in a pile. And here you can see, I'll zoom in. Here's the art for that. It's just like a pile of rubbish, but there's like a little sword popping out, and they just throw their pile in there. And it's like basically a chest, but thematically, it's just great. Same thing, we wanted the equivalent of a kitchen. How can we do that? Because they're not going to have cupboards and everything like these human castles. Well, they just take their bug meat and they throw it in these disgusting meat tiles, and then they cook it. Oh, I love it. That's So that's where some of this came from. And that's what was the result of this. So the next step will be, a lot of this art is getting done. So the next step will be, after this update, I will do the programming, the first pass. If we go back to this document, do the first pass, I'll implement the dungeon and then start getting feedback, and then we'll see what needs to change. A big thing that will need to change probably, or that's coming, is what I call like mutators. And that's interesting content I put on top of a dungeon. So castles right now have Ravagers and Ghosts. These are things that can appear or not appear and change the feeling of a dungeon. There's a lot more I want to add. So Gremlin Fortresses, there's going to be some, for sure. But I don't want to start over-design them first. It's much better, you have your playground, you have all your basics, you open a room, there's some monsters, there's some loot, there's some stuff happening. There's your core. Now you can look at it and you go, okay, what is some spice I can throw in this? What's some magic? What's some chaos that would appear? What's something that would just like throw this whole dungeon, tilt it differently so that one floor is different than another floor? This will come as a later step for me, because before in the past I knew like implementing Ravagers was its own like patch. It was a lot of work, and I'll just show that in the roadmap here. If we go to, I think it's, sorry for all the scrolling here. dungeon events is what I called them. Okay, well, dungeon events. So these are infestations or magical effects that have a chance to spawn into the dungeons. This is like one of the things I'm most actually excited about for the game. And I can imagine a lot more coming. I just, it needs to wait for some more clarity on the spaces where the mutators will appear. And that's what we're doing here with the Gremlin dungeons. Returning here to this like early art mock-up, I'll say, yeah, this is where I'm at. It's now creating the assets and then doing the dungeon. And I'm hoping to do something interesting with the rooms. I'm not sure yet. Just like, look, see these walls? Like, it's kind of lazy just to always have cubes. I would love to have some like more interesting walls or like ways rooms are aligned and just to play with the dungeon algorithm, which I haven't done for a while. So that's another thing I'm hoping to do here. Yeah, that's all I have to say today. Thanks for watching. Sorry if the voice was too annoying. I just felt like making a video, and I'd like to do these more regularly. So there we go.